Say I sit down with you and you're writing a story about me.
Sure.
And you go, hey, what'd you do yesterday? And I go, you know what? I took my youngest daughter to the petting zoo and we hugged a llama. You could write a story that says comedian has intimate encounter with llama.
Technically, yeah.
Technically true, but you made it sound like I f***ed a llama. Journalism. Since America's founding, journalism has been the backbone of democracy, giving voice to the voiceless and opinion columns to middle-aged white guys. But today it's a profession in crisis. We've all heard about the mass layoffs and decline of public trust in journalism. What caused that lack of trust? We may never know. But as journalism gropes around for new business models and new formats, the lines between good journalism and good content certainly have been blurred. And we have gone from a nation watching Walter Cronkite report on the moon landing to a nation watching Donald J. Trump go on bussin' with the boys. In short, journalism is a f***ing mess. Now to help me sort through it, I sat down with the Dean of the Columbia School of Journalism, Jelani Cobb, to talk about the TikTokification of news, the hot take industrial complex, and perhaps the biggest threat to our youth today, Sesame Street. By the way, you know, this is very rare for me. I didn't think I'd be sitting back down with the New Yorker, but here we are.
Yeah, okay, well.
New year, new me, Dean Cobb. Turn the page.
Okay, I appreciate that, thank you.
Listen, I'm recording, you can record as well.
I appreciate your candor.
Let's talk about where we are in time. According to a Pew survey, it found that nearly half of Americans get their news from social media. I actually think it's higher. But a third of adults under 30 get their news on TikTok. Does that scare you?
I think it challenges me, you know, because here's one thing.
It terrifies me, Dean Cobb.
Sure, but here's the thing. Like, as we have kind of moved from, you know, print, you know, to radio, to television, to kind of digital and all the other kinds of iterations, there's always been a kind of learning curve, and there's always been a difficulty in translating what we learned in one medium onto the next medium.
Yes.
You know, right now, kind of anything goes. That's because so much is in flux, and we haven't figured out how these things work. I suspect that there will be a point where we figured out at least some kinds of ground rules.
Let's play a game right now. We're gonna both look at TikTok under the hashtag news and see what the majority of Americans see first thing in the morning.
Okay.
Let's check it out. Fly it in.
Sorry.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay. I'm gonna give you this one.
This is TikTok. We have just put in news. Here we go.
Donald Trump vowing to crack down on illegal immigration.
News.
Taking into fact that Mr. Trump as a presidential candidate says that he is ready and wants to stop.
Mr. Schulman, your name is on this. Is this correct?
Yes, I signed that memo.
Oh, shit.
You are the author of the family separation policy. College campus. You're not the author, but this administration's message to millions of Americans that they're going to wake up day after the election if Trump won and have more than 90 people discovered inside one home. Some of the people found
90?
We have seen one estimate that says it would cost $88 billion to deport a million people.
I don't like that. Get this out of here. Get this out of here. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Look, I don't feel informed. I feel like I got attacked by birds.
I think we must have been on different kind of things, because I got a lot of really good kind of well-produced segments on there. But also, these are TikTok, you know, dispatches from traditional media organizations for the most part.
But you didn't think, Dean Cobb, you didn't think the music and then the graphics, all that, and the fact that a whole story.
Sir, I have been on some sets for traditional news organizations where it felt like being locked inside of a pinball machine.
I think you connected by saying that the simple reason for the stereotype.
However, the only person whom he ever
then you're not being honest.
I'm afraid. Jelani and David.
Full narrative.
Jelani and David.
What is happening here?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it felt like you were on a Japanese game show.
Yeah, for real. And so that is probably something that is infected to probably a lesser degree traditional media.
You know, we talk about the erosion of national news, but I also want to talk about the erosion of the power of the national masthead.
Oh, yeah,
And the fact that there used to be a time where you'd say, hey, I'm a writer for the New York Times. I'm a writer for the New Yorker. I'm a writer for one of these huge journalistic institutions. And now there is a growing incentive to say, well, who is the writer? What is their Substack?
Sure.
What is their social following? How do you feel about that incentive structure, about your likes, your clicks, your views, clout chasing over just being a faceless masthead that just tells the story or just tells the news?
So one, I think that it's not an ideal situation.
Yes.
I also understand why journalists have kind of taken that direction.
Yeah.
Because your career, it used to be that you could go to a legacy newspaper, start when you were 22 and retire when you were 62.
Yes.
Now that is not the landscape. You're going to go from organization to organization to organization, likely within 5 years.
Yes.
And as a kind of insurance card, really, you have to have a name that will translate from place to place to place.
Right.
And so people are thinking, okay, if I'm reporting in Sacramento, and now my next gig is going to be in Detroit, what can I do to ensure that at least somebody in Detroit knows who I am?
Yeah.
And if I'm going from Detroit to Ohio, how do I make sure that people in Ohio will say, oh yeah, I like this person. I saw her do this, or I saw him do that. And again, not the best kind of incentive structure.
Well, I feel like sometimes that incentive structure can create bad faith journalism. What that is doing is it's incentivizing, let me find a story where I dunk on something or someone, and then I can become a personal brand that benefits off of that. I can take clout, likes, views off of that to build up my blue check. I feel like that's super dangerous for journalism.
Here's an interesting thing, right? We can go back to...
But I could be wrong. By the way, push back.
No.
If I'm wrong and you're like...
No. But I think it's good to have some context here.
Yeah.
This journalism school was established with a bequest from Joseph Pulitzer's will, specifically because he was concerned about ethics in journalism. And the school was started because a circulation war between the Pulitzer papers and the William Randolph Hearst papers pushed the country into the Spanish-American War. And they both realized, like, we have control of this incredibly powerful machine. If we do the wrong thing with it, people can die. And the school was meant, the first bedrock thing that the school was supposed to do was teach ethics. Now, we teach lots of other things, but our students start with ethics because the conflict in media has always been the idea of being a responsible bulwark, informing the public, the redoubt of democracy.
Right.
Or the lurid, tabloid, suggestive, exaggerated, titillating stories that can get you a lot of circulation, get you a lot of money, build a name for you, but really are kind of corrosive to the public. We've always had that conflict.
That tension between good journalism and the business model.
What digital has done is exploded. It's magnified everything. You can do now all kinds of reporting, all kinds of data. Like, we have investigations that we could never have imagined before. We also have the capacity to do the kind of dark side, terrible incentive, poorly thought out, go for the kind of most elemental id emotions that we can think of.
Right.
That kind of work exists on a bigger scale too.
For our listeners who didn't get to read your article, I give you a lot of props for leaving Twitter.
Thank you.
Can you elucidate really briefly about why you left Twitter?
The most fundamental reason I left Twitter was I realized that anything and everything I did generated revenue for a entity that I thought was not informing the public, was not invested in informing the public, and a place where misinformation, disinformation could proliferate. One
of the reasons why I left Twitter, I'm clearly not as ethical and moral as you. I just felt like the place was insane. And it was really concerning to me, now that the power of the masthead has declined and the power of the blue check has increased, I would see journalists that I respect get in full Twitter spats with other journalists, with their own coworkers. And I had this moment.
I mean, in fairness, that happens in newsrooms too. So,
totally. Right. But to broadcast it for 8 billion people in the blockchain, in amber forever, is wild.
Yeah.
Because I felt the same way about when I watched my parents fight when I was 14. Oh my God.
Right.
The people who are in charge don't have good discernment.
Yeah.
That's what that signals to me. It signals your discernment.
I think that,
and lack thereof.
Yeah, I've had conversations, off the record, personal conversations with journalists about exactly this thing.
Yes.
And saying that, it's kind of almost like, professional wrestling, where it's like a complete spectacle. There's like nothing useful that comes out of it.
Like, could you imagine if Supreme Court justices were on Twitter? Just Judge Sonia Sotomayor is like, hey, at Delta, where are my goddamn bags? This is a piece of shit airline. I'd be like, Judge Sotomayor, do you not have a dissent to write?
Yeah.
But Judge Sotomayor does feel a certain way about Delta.
Sure.
Or thinks, the finale of Lost wasn't great. Do we need to know this?
Probably not.
Yeah. And I think knowing those things, those little curvatures of your mind, of your ego, of your pettiness, I think create just a wrecking ball of insanity where I think the public may lose trust when you can just see this out in the open.
Yeah, I think that one of the other things about X in particular is there are people who got book deals off of something they tweeted. There are people who had an idea and you tweet the idea out, an editor sees it, and now you have an assignment.
Yes.
You build up following so that when you actually do that story, a bunch more people read it. All of those things. And people were thinking about, oh wow, I can report on this thing, I can build a brand on this thing, I can do all these things, and they weren't necessarily thinking about the trade-off.
Right.
What's in the fine print? And the fine print is that we're on this machine that has this kind of wild, unknowable algorithm where all sorts of like toxic spew is just kind of flying all over the place. The worst kinds of parts of our psyches are being, fed and tapped into. We're engaging in combat in some way.
Yes.
And so I don't think that was ever really necessarily as useful as we thought it was.
Yes.
Or at least the benefits were not.
And I hope you're not teaching your students that of like, oh, how do we engage in combat on X? Like that's a crazy thing to say.
that we don't have that class.
Yeah. A cheap critique I've seen with journalism and the state of journalism, not currently, but the way it's always been, is this thing called objectivity theater.
Welcome to Objectivity Theater.
I've brought 100% factual headlines from the New York Times, okay? Now you explain to me what is happening here.
Okay.
These are real headlines, okay? The New York Times, civilians killed as U.S. troops fire on Afghan bus. Yeah.
Passive voice.
Yeah. Who shot at the bus?
Yeah, passive voice there.
Why are they doing this?
That's giving major passive voice.
That's giving major passive.
Yeah.
Right. What it should say is
U.S. troops
fire on bus, killing innocent Afghan civilians.
U.S. troops fire on bus, civilians killed.
Yes.
Or civilians killed by U.S. troops in bus exchange, whatever. Yeah.
Car hits crowd after white nationalist rally in Charlottesville ends in violence. So the car was racist?
Yeah, no, the car did not hit the crowd, and so, that is kind of soft pedaling, what actually happened. I can see, there are a couple of things. If you don't know who was driving the car,
yes,
and you don't know if this was a person who had a seizure and it happened to be that this rally was going on,
totally,
you don't know what why this incident happened.
Yes.
So you don't want to say something that attributes blame in a moment like this. Sometimes when news is breaking, but the car didn't hit the crowd.
Yes.
As if it just has volition in its own right and decided to do this.
Let's look at the third example. Explosion Gazans say was airstrike, leaves many casualties in dense neighborhood.
Yeah, so if there's an explosion, and I've been in situations like this, so there's an explosion, some people say it's an airstrike, other people are saying that it's a gas leak, and you have to put together a headline, you have 5 minutes to make this decision.
Right.
If I were in that case, I would simply say explosion. You come back to whether it was an airstrike or whether it was a gas pipe or whatever, car bomb, whatever the thing was. You put out the thing, there is an explosion, people have been killed, this is a developing story.
But it feels factually true but emotionally dishonest. That's the problem.
It feels like it's soft pedaling.
Yeah.
And that was Objectivity Theater.
We're seeing that right now currently with Gaza coverage. Mm-hmm. And this was concerning. Back in April, there was a memo leaked at the New York Times. The editors had instructed journalists to avoid terms like genocide, ethnic cleansing, and to not say occupied territory when describing Palestinian land. What was your reaction when you heard that?
So I think that there's been, first, I didn't see that particular memo.
Sure.
But I think that there's been a kind of left-hand, right-hand phenomenon, not just at the New York Times, with a lot of news organizations.
This may be a symptom of a larger problem.
Yeah, some of it is a kind of instinctive, I don't know, this conflict is very complicated, intractable. Anything I say could make me lose my job.
Yes.
I'm going to give the most bland possible assessment that I can get away with in this case.
Yes.
And also, I'm not going to say anything about Palestinians. Like that's kind of, I've seen that, kind of in operation.
Sure.
The other part of it, I think, has been that the reason I said this kind of left-hand, right-hand thing is that
what does left hand, right hand mean?
That sometimes one part of a news organization will be doing one type of coverage,
Got it.
and another part of that same news organization will be doing a different type of coverage.
Got it.
And so for all of the headlines that we saw from the New York Times, that were kind of rounding down to the least offensive kind of category, especially as it related to Gaza, the coverage on the other side on their podcast, The Daily, has been very different in its tone and tenor. And then the New York Times Magazine has published Ronen Bergman's work, who has been an Israeli journalist who's been intensely critical of Israel's policies in the West Bank and in Gaza, and just laying out what's happened. And I'll say this because, I'm a dean of a journalism school, and I've interacted with journalists across a wide array of things. Sometimes these are just very complicated situations that people have to make a decision on in a snap, and it comes out in a way that might not even be the best way. That journalist or that editor might say the next morning, I didn't get it that time. Mm. Sometimes there's a kind of institutional default, where it is like, wherever it is that we are not going to offend this particular group of people. Whether that's an intentional decision, whether that's an implicit kind of bias, that happens too, in all kinds of organizations.
I hear what you're saying, which is a decision has to be made like this. Is the speed and velocity of information, and necessary information that has to get out to the general public, but oftentimes there's not, by the time those plastic bottles are put into the ocean, per se, there isn't systems put in place to go, hey, we got to clean up some of those plastic bottles that we accidentally, maybe not even on purpose, dumped into the ocean. Because new information has to come out today. That makes me disenfranchised with the news. It makes me super, because I'm like, they can get it wrong, they meaning any news organization, and there is no justice for this. So
in theory, that's what we talk about, the second story. Your second story is supposed to be better than your first story. It's supposed to be, the second story is supposed to happen in the time frame where you reflect upon, the headline where we made it seem like the car, just of its own will, turned itself on and plowed into that doesn't fly. Like, this is a person who has white supremacist sympathies, who got behind the wheel in the midst of this, plowed the car into this crowd and killed someone. And so, in theory, that's supposed to be the metabolism that we operate under.
Right. I wasn't familiar with the second story.
No, it's a concept, like your second story. And so, but also, by that same notion, we're supposed to be, as news organizations, as journalists, we're supposed to be an external check on power. That's why the Constitution protects us in the First Amendment. But we also need external checks. And we also need to have the kind of humility that's required to actually look and say, have we served everyone to the best of our ability in the way that we followed this story? And there, there's a wide variety in terms of how conscientious news organizations are about that.
I have friends that work in journalism, and they say that the majority of traffic, and again, this is digital traffic, is for op-ed journalism.
Sure.
More than kind of the front page journalism. Do you find that concerning that this is the Stephen A. Smithification of journalism?
Hasan Minhaj doesn't know when to stop making basketball analogies.
The hot take industrial complex.
Oh, wow.
Because when I watch First Take, I know what it is.
Yeah, I know.
First Take.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I know what it is. I know that Steven's gonna piss me off.
Yeah.
JJ's gonna reel me in, and Skip Bayless is gonna needlessly hate on LeBron.
I'll just say I would never publish anything of the caliber of Stephen A. Smith's opinions in a paper. But that's neither here nor there.
Don't say that, Dean Cobb.
Yeah, no.
This man is driven. I mean,
yeah, no.
Yeah.
That's neither here nor there.
Okay.
But for the basic level of it, what's happened, the reason that you see so much opinion now is that news budgets have gotten very constrained. Not a surprise.
Yeah.
And reporting is expensive, especially foreign reporting. You have to fly people places, and you have to give them housing, and you have to provide for all the stuff that goes into producing a story, and that's expensive. Opinion, it's cheap, it's fast, it's plentiful, and people will read it.
I have a pitch on this, how to fix this whole thing, because people conflate opinion with page one journalism.
Right.
This is my pitch, and take this. You don't even need to credit me. All opinion journalism should just be in Comic Sans MS. And then regular news is Times New Roman.
It's an idea.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can kind of clearly label opinion at the beginning.
That's not working. It's too regal.
Right.
It's too regal.
Yeah.
It's
worth a try.
Yeah. If you just saw Thomas Friedman articles in Comic Sans MS, you'd be like, got it. Understood. Just like this guy's, he's joking. Have you read Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death?
I have not.
Dean Cobb.
Yes, no, I
No
haven't.
way.
Sorry.
No way. Oh, but are you familiar with Postman's work
I'm
a little
actually
bit?
not, no.
Okay, over 40 years ago, it was written in 1985. It was specifically about television and media and its influence on educating the public. This is a great book. There's two passages that I think about a lot when it comes to journalism, informing the public, and infotainment. Postman writes, television is at its most trivial and therefore most dangerous when its aspirations are high, when it presents itself as a carrier of important cultural conversations. The irony here is that this is what intellectuals and critics are constantly urging television to do. And to me, this so speaks to the problem of infotainment. There is this desire from the writer class to be like, this movie is education. This TV show will inform you. By the way, I had this with Patriot Act, my show. I had to entertain you to teach you. Nobody cares about the protests in Sudan. Sure. That's why I had to have a David Guetta LED show. People are like, oh, there's purple lights. Maybe I should think about Sudan. But the very idea that I have to entertain you in order to inform you means in and of itself, the necessary condition is entertainment. And it should only be seen as such.
I don't know. I don't agree. I mean,
do you believe that it's making us feel smarter without actually making us smarter?
No. The reason I say that is, let's think about the teachers who actually had an impact on us. Those are people who certainly had a mastery of their subject matter.
Correct.
Who understood things. They also understood how to engage people.
Yeah. IRL though. IRL.
Yeah.
There's this passage about Sesame Street that I love. People, and Sesame Street should absolutely get its flowers, 55 years, salute. If we are to blame Sesame Street for anything, it is for the pretense that it is an ally of the classroom. As a television show, and a good one, Sesame Street does not encourage children to love school or anything about school. It encourages them to love television. I love this so much. I have a 6-year-old, I have a 4-year-old. One of my children has to get tutoring for reading. All we watch is the PBS Kids app. Fuck Coco Melon, respectfully, okay? But my little guy will watch, and as you know in Sesame Street, their programming is what? We need to teach you 1 through 10, and we need to teach you the letters. The word of the day, the letter of the day, and the number of the day. All Sesame Street has done is taught him how to watch Sesame Street well. And it's a relatively good program, but it will never replace his tutor at school that physically teaches him how to read. Big Bird will never teach him how to read. But his teacher, and my teacher, Mrs. Leddington, when I was in 1st grade, taught me how to read. And I think we have over-indexed the power of infotainment, of a Vox video, or of a news article.
I'll put my cards on the table
Sure.
and tell you that I'm very good friends with the founder of Sesame Street. And so I'm not a completely objective person. But I will say this, the thing that I think that's interesting is that that's kind of a half argument.
Yes.
It's like Sesame Street only teaches you how to, to watch Sesame Street.
And it's entertaining.
But if like a kid goes off and does something violent, then it's like, oh, all the violence they've absorbed on television has predisposed them to behave this way. So if it's educational, we're going like, oh, this is probably not making any difference. But if it's deleterious, then it's like, oh, it probably is being absorbed. And for that matter, like a lot of the kind of values and the kinds of, like now people are into social emotional learning, which is saying that you have to actually kind of prepare the whole person as opposed to simply the kind of rudiments of how many numbers do you know, how many words do you know, and so on.
Yes.
And if you were looking at the social emotional side of it, then that might be a whole other element, which is probably what I got. What I got from Sesame Street was probably more about values than it was about particular like numbers or Cookie Monster or like any of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. What I got from Sesame Street, and the reason why we still watch it, I'm a huge fan, would love to be on it. I think it's great, comforting television. Here's what Postman is arguing, and what I agree with. Let junk be junk, and let real learning from Professor Cobb, from this amazing institution, let real learning be real learning. In other words, let TV be TV, and don't make it more than that, and make reading books. I truly believe this, and I know you feel this when you deal with your students. You cannot tweet, you cannot Substack, and you cannot podcast your way into understanding things. I mean, look at this amazing set that we have here. I can watch as many YouTubes as I want about how to make film and video and television, but there is no better teacher than physically understanding the weight of that C-stand, how much those sandbags weigh. What is 3-point lighting? Why we have to hand you a napkin? Because the shine on this part, it can only be lived. And what I love about books, asking someone out on a date, making sweet love with your beloved, any of these things must be learned in real time. They are practical things. They are not kind of intellectual things to be discerned or critiqued through the screen. Am I thinking about this the right way?
I 100% agree with you.
Okay.
The thing that we do here is exactly that. The first week that our students arrive, we turn them loose on the city to report. And the goal is for them to make mistakes. Now let's go back and see exactly which mistakes you made. And that's where the learning actually starts. So I entirely agree with you.
Yes.
But listen, I have to tell you this, and I'm not saying this just to blow smoke. I don't believe in blowing smoke, but like, this is one of the most well-informed conversations I've ever had. And I've had conversations with a lot of journalists who have not been as insightful or, as well educated on the particulars of journalism as you've been in this conversation.
Dean Cobb. High praise. I can't top that. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
I needed that.
Yeah. No, for real.
This morning, your boy needed that. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Cobb, everybody. It's vanta.com/Hasan for $1,000 off.